With spring football practice now over halfway complete, it's time for another West Virginia football roster update here on the Country Roads webcast. Let's go! What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Jordan Cruz back here with the Country Roads webcast. And before I get into this video, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder. If you would do us a favor, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up on this video. It'll really help not only its performance, but future videos performances here on the channel as well. And if you're a WVU fan and you haven't already, be sure hit that subscribe button. Helps us, helps you, helps get more of this Mountaineer sports content out to Mountaineer Nation. Having said that, let's get into it. All right, so those of you that have been following along throughout the offseason here on the Country Roads webcast know that I've been trying to cover the West Virginia roster as it progresses throughout the offseason. We know that there's a lot of shifts and turns, and it's very fluid, especially in today's game with the transfer portal and things like that. Thus, throughout the offseason, the roster will have very many different variations, different versions, I guess you could say. So I'm trying to update them with people moving to different positions, different additions, things like that throughout the offseason. And you can see that here on the channel on the Country Roads webcast. If you go into our playlists, I've got a roster update playlist. Each one of these videos is dated with the date, so you'll know which one is the most recent West Virginia roster you can look at. As I've said all along, only scholarship players included in these updates, not including any walk-ons or preferred walk-ons. So some of those guys may earn scholarships throughout the spring going into the fall, and then they may show up on the roster. I've mentioned some standout preferred walk-ons in the past that I think could play a part for West Virginia this season, be it minimal, be it major, be it a role player, whatever. I think that Hudson Clement, a wide receiver, we've seen other wide receivers that were walk-ons, Grayson Malashevich and Preston Fox earn scholarships. He could be on a similar path there. That's a preferred walk-on to watch. Just some names you won't see on this roster that are names you may see in the spring game if you're going up here in less than a couple weeks now for West Virginia. Dylan Ray on the offensive line. I think he's been running with the second team. That's a preferred walk-on there. And then at punter, Leighton Beckdale apparently in a competition with Oliver Shaw. He's been having a good spring apparently. And then at kicker, of course, Danny King, a former preferred walk-on, competing with the now Georgia State transfer Michael Hayes. But enough of me babbling about some of the roster. Let me show it to you here with our April 10th roster update here on the Country Roads webcast. Let's take a look at the West Virginia roster as it stands today. All right, so if you've been following along, you've seen a lot of these. I'm not going to talk about every position. I'll just kind of scroll through slowly so you can get a look in case you haven't seen. Like I said, a lot of these positions will be fluent, especially a wide receiver where some of these guys may end up on the outside that are on the inside and vice versa. Some of them aren't competing yet in the spring. Thinking of Davis Mallinger, who just shift over from Spear, where he'd been in the past couple seasons for West Virginia on the defensive side. Really speedy guy. Did a video on that as well. Tight end, of course, we know there's a lot of bodies in that room, but there's also a couple fullbacks. They aren't listed on this roster. They're both preferred walk-ons, one that's been here before in Colin McBee, and then another one in Luke Hamilton. I did a video on him here on the channel as well. Those are two fullback bodies that West Virginia has you won't see on this roster as well. Offensive line, this is where I've made some changes since our last roster update here on the Country Roads webcast. So here on the April 10th version, this is just kind of to coincide with what we saw in West Virginia's first spring scrimmage, the first time they went inside the stadium about a week ago on Saturday. And so what we saw in that scrimmage, of course, the starting five offensive linemen, Wyatt Milam, Thomas Remick, Zach Frazier, Jaquay Hubbard, and Doug Nestor will probably be what you see in the fall. Of course, that's subject to change. We'll see how that goes with the right guard and right tackle really being the ones that would change the most there. But throughout the spring, we know Zach Frazier's really not participating a ton. West Virginia doesn't want to risk an injury to him. We also saw Doug Nestor sit out in that spring scrimmage, so we actually saw Nick Malone start as the right tackle, so that's why he's been moved over to right tackle. With Zach Frazier out, Brandon Yates has been working as the team's center this spring. We know this season they're going to use him more at guard and center. He's been working at center. The second string center in the scrimmage in the spring actually was Charlie Katarinchik, who previously was listed here at guard on our last roster update, I believe. Matt Moore mentioned he is working at guard and center, but they had him as the second string center, so I moved him here on the roster to reflect that, and you still got Landon Livingston there. The other change, Johnny Williams, I believe I had him at right tackle. I moved him over to left tackle because he was the second team left tackle with that offensive line. Mo Hamilton was the second team left guard. And Sully Weedman is a guy that they're really high on. They've actually compared him to Thomas Remick, a player that we saw come on late last season and become a freshman All-American. So Sully Weedman, I think, will play a part this season, albeit as a reserve probably early on, and who knows what that will develop into moving forward. So those are kind of some of the changes on the offensive line here on this April 10th roster update. Defensively, there weren't a ton of changes, really, I don't think. The ones that really stood out to me that I made here was Eric Burton, a guy that had formerly been listed as a defensive end. He's moving over to help the Bandits. We know they needed kind of some bodies there. James Hurd, coming in as a true freshman, is expected to play a role this season, despite being a true freshman, a really talented pass rusher. Jared Bartlett's been talked about having a very good offseason, but those were really the only two bodies West Virginia had at the Bandit position. I had kind of thought that maybe Torres Simmons, who had entered the transfer portal but decided to return to West Virginia, may work at Bandit, but he's been working a defensive end. So Eric Burton has moved over to Bandit, and I like him there. He's about 6'5". He's one of West Virginia's international players. I believe he's from Germany, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me there, but definitely one of West Virginia's international players working at the Bandit spot. That's another one of the positions. You see the defensive line there. And getting into the linebackers, I made some adjustments there as well. Will linebacker, we've seen Trey Latham work there. John Faveras, I expect one of those two to probably get the majority of the reps come the fall, but look out for Ben Cutter. Despite being a true freshman, I think he's going to play there some. And Josiah Trotter, it's a toss-up to whether he's going to factor into that competition at the will linebacker spot or serve as kind of the reserve backup and spell Lee Koba a little bit. I think they're looking to get Lee Koba off the field a little bit more. He had to play a ton of snaps last season. Tyreek Austin Cave, though, was finally mentioned this past week. That was good to hear. So I think him and Josiah Trotter are kind of in competition for that backup spot at the Mike linebacker's position. If Tyreek Austin Cave ends up edging him out there, I wouldn't be surprised to see Josiah Trotter slide over and factor into that competition, a will linebacker come the fall. But here in the spring, as far as this April 10th update's concerned, he's there. I've talked about Hershey McLaurin moved into the Spear in the past. Don't think there's really too many other changes along this roster. Keyshawn Cobb working at deep safety. Talked about that on the last update. Michael Hayes, Oliver Straw, Danny King, Leighton Bechtel, another specialist that I mentioned earlier. Those are kind of who's working there. So that's a little bit of a look at the roster here with an April 10th roster update from us here at the Country Roads webcast. So there you have it, Mountaineer Nation. Appreciate you guys tuning in to another West Virginia football roster update here on the CRW. We'll continue to have these throughout the offseason as it progresses, specifically once spring ball ends and that transfer portal window opens May 1st. Hopefully these roster updates will come hot and heavy throughout the summer months heading into the fall when West Virginia finally shapes up that final roster heading into fall camp. I know I've heard Neil Brown say they're probably definitely going to add another wide receiver and a defensive lineman, and who knows what else they may add in addition to that. We'll see what happens moving forward, and we'll be here to update it all along the way. Be sure to let us know in the comments what you think of the roster as it stands now throughout the spring, and what you would add if you were one of the coaches on the staff there looking to add a piece in the transfer portal that can really help this team in the fall. What positions were you looking at, or what players specifically? Anything you want to let us know down there. We really appreciate the interactions in the comments as we continue to try and grow the Country Roads webcast community throughout Mountaineer Nation. Having said that, as always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go, Mountaineers.